Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Organising Culture and the Role of IT. So what does the new normal look like? Over the next hour or so, you'll be listening to three excellent speakers about their version or their vision within the new normal. Just next, please. So that just before we start, little housekeeping. If you've got questions, we're not going to answer them after with each of the speakers. We're going to have a panel session at the end of it. So these are the quick instructions. Please take note and write your questions there, and then I'll review them towards the panel session and then ask them for you. Thank you very much. Next. So who am I? Well, my name is Shakib Niazi. I've been in tech for nearly 40 years. A fellow of the BCS, fellow of the IT, and a fellowship of the Institute for Enterprise and Entrepreneurship. I've been around IT since the very first punch cards, and so I've seen so many changes. The adoption of remote working has been phenomenal, and in the past year, lots of people are globally working remotely. And what does that mean to businesses? Building owners, retail, and everything else. So over the coming hour and a half or so, we'll have different views and a panel discussion at the end of it. We'll be joined today by Jonathan Leeson, who's a fellow BCS, and he is the technology portfolio manager for ExxonMobil. Also, Lynn Webb, again, another fellow of the BCS and chief information officer of Open University, and the non-techie, which is Sonia Saxon, who's an experienced corporate mentor and has the kind of the psychological or the well-being aspect of what we need to do, the mindset of what we need to have in this new world. So over to Jonathan. Hi, Jonathan. Can you please?
Hi, thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, so as I said, as Keith said, my name is Jonathan Leeson. I work for ExxonMobil, and I've been doing so for the last 27 years. But basically, the majority of my career, and I'm currently the technology portfolio manager, which basically means I'm responsible for the delivery of IT projects across the corporation. Obviously, fairly large company. We've got many locations around the world, and prior to COVID, I spent most of my time sort of traveling around the world, meeting people, developing my business sort of specifications with my customers, and generally working with my teams. So quite a change in the environment. And in fact, 2 days before we had the lockdown in the US, I was on a flight out of the US back to the UK, and thought I would be returning to the US probably within 2 weeks. And here I am 18 months later, still sitting in my garden office, developing new ways of working with my teams. So as you can imagine, the travel restrictions for me, but also for many of you, has made some interesting changes to the way I work and the way my teams work. And that's what I'm trying to sort of talk about today. And the insights that I'm sharing are really my own experience. They're not the views or opinions of the company or anybody else. They're just what I've seen across my working career. And I think the other panelists here will share some of their experiences as well. And hopefully that will enable us to have sort of an engaging and active discussion at the end. And please submit your questions as you go forward. Equally, if you want to contact me after the event, you can do. And I've got my LinkedIn details at the end if you want to make contact with me. Okay, so the first slide, if we go into sort of the diversity side, is really what does the situation look like today? Return to normal. What is that going to be? Well, I think nobody really knows at the moment. I certainly know we won't return back to the old normal, which is everybody traveling around the world for we had extreme situations where people would travel for one-day meetings to the US, and I think people have realized that's a very inefficient way of working, and actually what value do you generate from that? Equally, we've seen examples where people have gone for high value meetings that need that face-to-face introduction, and will continue to do so. If you're meeting a customer for the first time, the value of that face-to-face can be paramount to getting the business deal. And I think people still expect some of that interaction. I think equally, depending upon the type of role that you have, you may well be able to embrace the the concept of home working or working remote from your colleagues. So if you're in freelance, in a contract, or say a gig economy type role where you can potentially do your job from the beach and you're programming, then that's great. But we've also got folks that, as I mentioned earlier, need to interact with clients. They're trying to develop new business models that perhaps will require some of that face-to-face review. You might even have to do something that's quite tactile, where you're actually showing something to somebody and they physically want to be able to touch that piece of equipment or get to understand a bit more of the ins and outs of it. Or you're actually somebody who makes things, and we have to remember there are a lot of people that make things in the world. So and to make stuff, you've got to be there. So you know, those folks are still going to have to be there. You know, I'm in the oil and gas industry. We have platforms, refineries. You know, they are key workers on those sites, and they will have to continue working on those sites despite the amount of remote support that we do for those facilities. And we still have people obviously present on the platforms or the refineries or the distribution centres. So we're going to have to see this sort of, you know, mix as we move forward. So if we go onto the next page, I will just move on, Jackson. Yeah. So I wanted to say, where are we now? And the picture in the top is something I took last week, really, just showing you some of the challenges. So I've got folks that, as I mentioned, they're all around the world. I collaborate with people mainly in the US, India, Argentina, Brazil, and Hungary. And you can see from that chart, they're all at different stages. So to say that, oh, we'll send everybody back to the office or we'll try and work remotely isn't necessarily an option that we have. And we're sometimes dictated by governments as well. So there can be pressure on us by you know, a certain country to return people back to the office. From an economic perspective, they may see that's the right way, and we as a company may have to adopt a stance with them to do that. So again, I think trying to decide what is the new normal and the way we work might necessarily not be in our control. So that I think is a challenge that we're potentially going to have to work with. And again, the other side of it is, you know, as we move back into the office, you know, one big question is what's in people's employment contracts. You know, one of the big things that we have is your location of work is in there, both so you know where you're working, but equally so the company has an understanding of what pay and support you're going to get. So that in itself can be another challenge as well. And then finally, what is really interesting from a sort of a business perspective is the transportation sort of demand has really returned back to a sort of a pre-COVID situation. Now, you know, obviously aviation excluded, you know, because most of us aren't flying. It's amazing how many people now are using vehicles again. Obviously shipping has increased because of the lack of aviation, and then car transportation, trucks, haulage is pretty much back to normal. Some of you may say that's because public transport isn't being used perhaps as much as it used to be. Once we get that back up and running, you know, we could see that demand drop, but we certainly aren't seeing it, not from our business perspective. So we'll see what happens as we move forward, and then obviously where we go with aviation. So we go to the next slide. This one is really, how are we responding to this? And I just wanted to share in that top corner, it's quite interesting some of the challenges that people are having when they're at home. It's, you know, we think, oh, it's great, you know, everybody can work from home, they've got all that flexibility, and, you know, yes, providing people with the flexibility to do either work from a home location or from a remote location or from the office is great. But when you're actually stuck at home all the time, and your home happens to be a 1-bedroom studio, and it's your office, it's where you cook, it's where you eat, it's where you socialise with your family, it's where you sleep, it can become quite a drain on your personal well-being. And I think, you know, I'm certainly seeing that with some of my folks, especially those that are new to the company, you know, on the first rung of their career. You know, they typically either sharing accommodation, and that can be with friends, or they can be actually just having a bedroom in their family home, and it can be quite draining on them. And also they're lacking that social interaction. You know, cameras and this sort of method of communicating are great now, but at the end of the day, it doesn't provide that real sort of human interaction. And I certainly saw that in a non-company perspective 2 weeks ago when I was competing at a triathlon. It's the first live triathlon I've done. I've done many virtual ones over the last 18 months, but the actual feedback you get from people at the side of the road shaking things and blowing whistles is amazing. It encourages you to go faster, by no ends, and you know, the sense of speed is just completely different on the road versus doing it in the real world. So I think we sometimes forget all that side of things as well. The good news is the remote collaboration is certainly increasing. You know, we've seen the use of the video cameras like we have today here, and some superb conferencing tools. You know, before it was sort of pretty basic stuff. You know, Teams here has developed. You know, we've got Go Meetings, Google are doing things, but there's even some bespoke conferencing solutions where you can go into sort of virtual meeting rooms, you can go into virtual arenas, you can have side discussions. And I think that in itself is great. I'm attending a conference at the moment over 3 days, and it's a hybrid conference, so it's actually being run out of London, but also with people remote. And the beauty of that is, one, I can be here having a conversation with you and still attend a full session during the day, and I would not have been able to have done that if I'd have been there in presence, in the physical presence. Equally, as we know with the BCS and with the Open University, you know, the amount of people you can introduce to these sessions who don't live in the same place is immense. You know, not only do we get people from all around the UK, but we're getting people from many other countries around the world, and we just didn't have that opportunity before. You know, like the best we got was people coming from Kent and from Hampshire and Surrey going into London, and that wasn't quite the diversity you expect when you're saying you're a global sort of institution. So it's great to see that that's changed. So I think, you know, that's a positive one for us. So if we go onto the final slide I've got, I just wanted to say, you know, obviously we're talking about this from an IT perspective. You know, I'm obviously a computer professional and a fellow of the BCS, as Shakib mentioned, and there's so many things that we can help with and that we're seeing, and it's, you know, this massive proliferation of new technology that can help and make life better. And just on that compass there on the right hand side just gives some examples of what you can do in the e-learning space. Again, massive opportunity. As a company, we stopped doing all of our, obviously we couldn't travel to do training, you know, we weren't allowed to go anywhere due to COVID, so we've massively increased the amount of e-learning we do, and the companies that we work with have also embraced that, and they started to do more videos of the training, so it's more interactive, and there's questions and answers. So again, makes a big difference compared to the old CBTs you used to have, which was as dry as anything, and you know, you were lucky if you got to the end before you fell asleep. So it was, you know, it's certainly changed since then. And then, you know, finally, as I come into my time, I think, you know, we've also got the ability to look at and monitor the situation. And I'm not saying monitoring people's work habits and checking what they're doing and making sure they're working correctly from a remote location, but actually looking at the demand. You know, are people using the facilities the way they should? Are we getting the occupancy in a building? Are we seeing people logging on at the right times, or even involved in the session? So, you know, getting an idea of that participation, because the last thing we want is people just turning up to meetings and not getting involved and not listening and not getting the value from it. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there from that perspective. So that's all I wanted to share. It was just an insight from my perspective, from what I've seen, and I will hand over to Lynn now, who's going to give a little bit of a different insight and hopefully get your brain matter working in a different way.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. So I think really, without question, the pandemic hasn't just changed the way most of us are working, but it's also changed the thinking about what's most important to us. I started in my current role at the OU literally 2 weeks before the first national lockdown, and that focused my mind somewhat. I think one of my first questions was, oh, I think we're all going to send everybody home. can you do it, Lynn? You know, what impact is that going to have on security at the OU? I'm the first Chief Information Security Officer, so I spent quite a lot of time thinking about how you bring a new role into an organisation, but also, you know, how I work with the team. And straight away, it was you know, not just the responsibility of the security of thousands of students and staff and assets such as research. It was actually about how we do that in a massive crisis which was looming. So I'm going to cover a range of themes. The main focus will be inevitably for me because of my role on security, but there are several different perspectives. While everyone has a different perspective, you know, when the pandemic struck, for most of us, it did mean being sent home, either to do our job, but where we were fortunate enough to be able to do that, or being sent home and furloughed. I mean, at the OU, we all went home and were able to do our job, but obviously unconscious that a lot of other organisations, it just made it very hard to do their job, or in a way, their jobs, such as retail or hospitality, was kind of obsolete for a short period of time. So I think, you know, most people, the perspective flipped. You know, we certainly at the OU were told, instead of no, you can't work from home, or if you do want to work from home, you know, we need to kind of understand what that's going to mean to us. It was actually, you're going to work from home, let's make it work. It was a totally non-negotiable, and so actually, you know, we were being sent home for our own safety. So from my perspective, it was about how can we make this work, which is slightly unusual for security in many respects. Next slide, please, Jack. And so, you know, in the beginning, I'm going to cover some of my early observations and some of the reactions. So next slide, please, Jack. Many people were really nervous. For me, this surprised me, but it was tangible. There were several people that had worked in their office environment for many, many years, sometimes even at the same desk. Using the same desktop system. I'm talking a bit about the OU, but I'm also talking about many, many other roles. You know, I talked to colleagues of my own in different sectors. Now, I came from a consultancy background prior to the OU, and I was very, very mobile. But whilst I might have worked from home or different people's offices at different times, taking conference calls on the train, on the bus, whatever, there was always like the mothership, there was always the headquarters to go back to. And so you have that support. And I think many people took that for granted. So one of the things that I observed immediately was that panic, that kind of shock of capture about, I'm going home, but who's going to provide my hardware? I haven't got a desk chair that works. And actually, in the first sort of week or so at the OU, my memory of the OU, this fantastic leafy campus in Milton Keynes, was members of staff loading chairs and monitors, you know, into the backs of their cars. You know, in any normal environment, security would have been all over that. But no, it was like, how can we make this comfortable? Next slide, please, Jack. And then there was this other thing about, which is quite old school. You know, some people worried that they wouldn't get as much done as an individual. You know, I had members of my team, and I'm aware of other people who genuinely thought they would get too distracted. They wouldn't be able to work from home. But also there's this presenteeism piece where a lot of bosses and senior people talking about, would their staff be productive? You know, surely I need to be supervising them. I need to see them working. And that was for me, that was quite interesting. The next slide, please, Jack. And then after that, you had a bunch of people who actually thought this was a good thing. They were quite excited about it. And people realised, I think, once they found a space for themselves at work, they actually had time to think. And several people very quickly became amazingly productive. Now, obviously, I'll cover the downside to that in a second. I think in the early days, my overwhelming feeling was that many people were outside of their comfort zone. And so from a security perspective, this is often when people make mistakes. For me, good security behaviours and habits are associated with their office environments. You know, they kind of have that muscle memory around security. They know where to store things. You know, even if it's down to printing something out, follow me printing. You know, they know there's very secure ways of doing it. You're destroying documents. We know how to do that. And even if it comes down to having meetings or conversations about sensitive activities, you know, and that was a big part for me. So I realised quite quickly that, you know, information security at my workplace suddenly had to be much more than just technology, and it was about how we help people be safe and feel safe and secure at home. And you know, we had quite a lot of challenges as time went on. So next slide, please, Jack. So sorry, I think sorry, the other thing I was just going to add there is stretching the comfort zone is one of the big issues that I found that people had. So you know, it was moving from what they were comfortable with in the office to a very different environment. Next slide, please. As everything became more permanent, we then discovered a few more things. And so next slide, please. And Jack, just build this one up. I think people actually started overworking. So we'd gone from I'm not getting disturbed to people saying, well, actually, I'm getting so much done. I think really I was on a leadership call when somebody said I really thought everybody would be skiving, watching daytime TV, but the outputs really are extraordinary. Now that person thought it was a great thing, but actually very quickly we realised that we needed to actually dial down on this a little bit and actually help people manage their time. Communication became incredibly formal. People couldn't just stop themselves at each other in the corridor. People had to write emails. And so the email traffic just rose. And I've seen reports of email traffic in organisations rising of over between 25 and 50% from when compared to what it used to be. And people were suddenly overburdened. They just had this information overload. And instead of picking up the phone, people were actually scheduling 30-minute sessions throughout their day. Their entire day was back-to-back 30-minute meetings instead of something where they might have picked up the phone or just stopped by somebody's desk. It even became so formal in some environments where a simple conversation didn't happen. Everything became very, very formal on an email. And you know, the bad tempers, very poorly worded emails, miscommunications, you know, it was huge. The other thing for me from a security perspective was the prevalence of cyber attacks. I think the fact that we were all working online and have been for some time, one of the things that's been worrying is that it's a simpler way now for attackers and cyber criminals to find us. We're all working online. That attack surface is just simply bigger, and it's simplified for them. So we have a bunch of people who are suddenly thrown out of their comfort zone, working from home in many cases, or working in environments where they're sharing their space with their family, their dogs, their spouses. They're often doing several jobs in one location, and more people are trying to attack us. So, you know, it was really, really fraught. You know, I think for me, that was quite a challenge. On the flip side, some of the ways of working online was actually more inclusive. So colleagues that might normally have had to travel from one end of the country to another, or if they did dial into a meeting, they were the only people who weren't present in the meeting. Everybody was in the same boat as far as this was concerned. So, you know, in some respects, that was quite a useful thing to find. Jack, next slide, please. So I think, you know, as far as I'm concerned, we've come quite a long way. I think Jonathan talked about, you know, the agile working space and, you know, the different things that we have learned and the creative environments. For me, there's this big thing about carrot versus stick in security, and often security is being used as a stick to beat people with, or a reason why we can't do something. In this case, we had to do it. You know, we absolutely had to do it, and the crisis turned our whole way of operating on its head. So instead of saying you can't do it because of this, or we want to buy this kind of security feature, it was all about this is how we want to work, this is how we have to work, how can we achieve it, how can we achieve it securely? And digital trust is a big thing as well. I found that in customer facing environments, as everybody started to get much more online and more comfortable with operating online, it became vital to maintain and improve that customer experience. So for the university, that's, you know, making sure our students and our staff can operate and we have no loss in productivity. And so, you know, it's about making sure we had that open and honest environment. So I found that rather than scaring people into brushing breaches under the table, or if they were concerned about something, not speaking out because, or if they've made a mistake, they fear blame. It was having that open and honest culture, and we certainly found that that helped us discover what was going on and then make improvements and work with people to help them. So, you know, we that sort of open and honest reporting culture has really helped with that whole digital trust. And I think challenging the norm for me is important. What is normal and what is BAU? I personally think going back to the old BAU shouldn't be an option, and I am slightly worried that there will be this drifting back into offices without really thinking about what we've learned. I think we've learned a lot about collaboration tools. I think we've learned about the fact that we've made efficiencies. I think we have challenged the need to travel, and I think that's a really, really good thing. But I think we've got an opportunity to make a bit of a paradigm shift here. I think the ways of working are going to change across the board. I think it's McKinsey that said as many as 25% more workers may need to switch occupations than would have done before the pandemic. And I think there will be a paradigm shift of in the way that we do business. And so, I mean, for a university, and I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but, you know, universities are going to have to operate, and they are operating in a very different way, you know, perhaps more like the OU. But, you know, why are we, you know, stuck on a 3-term year for universities, for example? Should it maybe different? You know, I'd see that, you know, we've seen more uptake in, you know, bite-sized training courses, and you know, we call them badged courses, and more demand-led activities. And so I think we've really got to embrace that opportunity. I think the thing about well-being for me is that the pandemic, I would say one of the positives that's come out of it for me is well-being has become a consideration in its own right. So for me, everything around security needs to include well-being, but it's also become an agenda item in its own right, as opposed to something we just add on to the way we do things, whether it's concerns about lone workers, you know, new employees, burnout because of a need to appear online the whole time, or simply having back-to-back meetings. You know, I think it's really made us think about it, and I think there's a lot more to come on that. And I think, you know, one of the things that I've realised is that flexibility isn't just about being able to work from home. It's about being able to work in a way that suits the individual. So some people simply work better very early in the morning. Some people simply work better at night. Some people would like to log on in the morning. They might do the school run. They might log back on. They might do the school run. They might log on again. Different people will have different ways. And I actually think it's been a massive equalizer because we've been able to be output led. And hopefully that should enable well-being to actually blossom, as opposed to really struggle to fit it in around the edges. Next slide, please, Jack. So really for me, I think my sort of takeaway on this and where we go is we've spent a lot of time being incredibly resilient. I think we've made an awful lot of progress. I think we have found innovation, but I think we've got to keep alive to the fact that normal will never be the same again. And I think we've got to stay open to the fact that things could be completely different. And I think the number of professions that don't exist now that will exist in 10 years time, you know, I don't think we can even comprehend what that might look like. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how we adapt our current processes in that way. I genuinely, things can only get better is my view here, but I think we've got to take the positives from that. And that was kind of my whistle-stop view of my experiences, really having arrived in a job just before the pandemic struck. But if anybody wants to, you know, reach out or get in touch, there's my details there, but I'll be happy to answer questions later. I'm going to hand over now to Sonia Saxon, and I think she's going to take us even more into this sort of psychology viewpoint of what's happened and what should happen in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lynn. So this is an opportunity for you to ask all those questions about your mental well-being. I've over 35 years looking after corporate culture and people's mental health and making sure they get the best out of it. So I'm going to be talking about how you get what you need mentally. And I'm particularly going to be focusing on some of the chemicals that you can release to make you feel so much better. So let's look at the first slide. So the future's not as we've known it. Now, a lot of people are wondering about where are they with the mental health? How do you know what you don't know about what's going on for you? Well, one of the things that I'll be offering today for the first few people that contact me is a free profile on what's really motivating you and what, if anything, is getting in the way of your mental health, so that you've got the facts, so that you can understand some of the things you can do about that. When you have a plan, when you know what you're going to do with the future in the way that you manage yourself mentally, you will always get a better result. Some people say that, well, you know, this is just the way I am. Actually, there's a lot more to it than that. And understanding more about the inner you, what makes you tick, can make the difference between you being actually really happy at what you're doing, whether you're working from home or in the office, or you're feeling a bit down. So let's have a look at that. So the future requires that you get your 5 a week. And these are the chemicals that you need to actually be really happy. And this is just an opportunity, a light-hearted opportunity, to have a think about how you actually release the positive chemicals for you. So let's start with what's happening at home, at your desk, your office desk. So let's look at that first one. So serotonin, the mood chemical. You know, I often hear about people working at the dining table. And what do you usually do at your dining table? At your dining table, you're usually having food together, ideally. And you're actually sharing some social time. Maybe you got used to just putting your laptop wherever there's a space. The dining table will start to become a workspace. And I've seen situations where families have been round the table and somebody's been on the laptop and they say, what are you doing on the laptop? We're having breakfast, or we're having dinner. Oh, well, I've just got a few things to do. Be antisocial. It can really affect the mood of those around you, and it can affect your mood. I suggest that you find a space that's not in a shared space, a space that's just for you, where you know when you go and sit in that chair, in that space, that's where you work. So it doesn't contaminate what is going on in your relationships. So just think about that now. See yourself at home. Where do you actually sit? Where do you make that workspace to get your serotonin? So let's look at the next one. What are you doing to release those endorphins? Some people have said to me, well, I don't want to go outside. I don't want to be exercising. You don't know who you might meet out there. It's really important for you to get that physical workout of some sort to get your heart going, because you don't want to miss out on your endorphins, do you? Remember, they are one of your happiness chemicals, and everyone wants a bit of happiness, right? And then what about this other one then? As we move on, your noradrenaline. I often say, have you got a bit of Nora? Your noradrenaline is about focusing on where are you going? What's the plan? If you don't have a plan and you can't focus on the future and know where is it taking you, you won't be releasing your noradrenaline. Your noradrenaline gives you that focus. And remember, if you're getting really smart and you've got your serotonin and you've got your endorphins going, why not have a bit of Nora? And then there's the next one. Oxytocin, that relationship chemical, that trust chemical. What has this meant for your relationships? Are you talking more? Are you relating more? Or have you hid in the bedroom with your laptop? Think about some of the things that you are doing to make sure that you are developing those relationships. And be careful about those relationships outside home. Just because you can't hug and kiss them, it doesn't mean that you can't stay in touch and actually learning more about that. And then there's this final chemical, dopamine. Everybody needs a bit of dope. Absolutely, the reward chemical. So what are you doing to reward yourself? If you are working really well, how are you making sure you get a reward? It might be that that reward is a nice bubble bath. I don't think you can beat that, even in this weather. However, what are you doing for yourself? Because everybody needs to reward themselves. And it doesn't have to cost much, does it? Think about what you are doing for yourself. When I'm talking to businesses about them maintaining their well-being through COVID, these are some of the chemicals that are missing. Some of the things that you say to yourself, the story you tell yourself about your day, determines whether you're releasing positive chemicals or you are taking yourself down a slippery slope. Ask yourself, what story have you told yourself today? Have you told yourself it's going to be a good day? I mean, after all, you're online with us. That's a good thing, isn't it? Think about how much humour you bring into your day, because that also helps with your brain function. It likes a laugh. It likes to enjoy life. So think about your questions, because I really want to help you with that. Let's look at the next one. So the future, not as we've known it, but how are you going to shape your future? How are you going to get to know more about the inner you? Sometimes when we lack that knowledge about what makes us tick, what motivates us, what is temporarily getting in the way about what we believe about our lives, ourselves, it's unconscious. 95% of who we are is not in the conscious mind. Surprising, isn't it? It's amazing how many people think they know that they are driving things. Actually, you usually are doing it on an automated basis. I'm really looking forward to your questions. And as I've said on this slide, I'd be really keen to offer you some free profiles, the first 10 to apply. So you can come online with me and I'll tell you all about the wonderful you, your motivations, what's temporarily getting in the way of your well-being and how you can start to resolve that. I'm really looking forward to hearing more from you. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, Sonia, Jonathan, and Lynn. And we're going to be joined now by John Hall, who not only works with the Open University, but is previous chair of the IT Leaders Forum. And he's involved in many other technical things. John, before we start, would you just like to give a minute about who you are and welcome to the panel?
Thanks, Shakib. My name is John Hall. I'm from the Open University, where I work with Lynn Webb and about 18,000 other people. I'm a teacher and a researcher. I teach information security and I research into organizational problem solving. Absolutely loved what Jonathan, Sonia and Lynn have said this afternoon. Really characterized the new normal, and I'm looking forward to getting stuck into these questions.
Thank you. Jack, can you put the cameras on everybody and get rid of the slide, please? And everybody would like to come off mute. All right, so I'm going to start from, the last speaker's perspective about our human condition. So one of the things about, the new norm and getting, lots of people saying, oh, let's get back to face-to-face meetings, let's get back into the office. But there's a lot of benefits from this remote working, because if you're disabled or difficult, a challenge, you have a challenge to travel, or what about being in a rural area? If you've got the connectivity, then you can actually do a lot of, open to the market again. You can actually get some jobs. So I'll go through this one by one, and the question is really going to be, what are you doing, or what is your organization, and what is your view on what should be this mix between virtual work and face-to-face work? I'm going to start off with Jonathan, because he's got lots of people in his organization. So what is your perspective on this? How is it going to go forward?
Yeah, certainly, and I'd say, obviously we published Craig's comments there, and I think Craig, what you're saying is absolutely true, and it's good to have a bit of variation here and encourage some debate. And I think for me it is all about that choice, making sure that we can give people choice. Like I said, there are some people that just can't get to an office now that we've opened up the opportunity. It's quite interesting in it brings its own challenges in Houston, for example, where we've got a lot of folks. We're now competing with companies that are in California. All right, so all of a sudden, California companies that have got a massive market, and they're looking for talent all around the world, and obviously they are reaching more to the US at the moment. But yeah, we are looking at ways of how can we make sure that people get the best out of their work. Okay, so be that at home, be that in the office, and it was certainly not efficient for me when I was, having to see somebody for 2 days to fly to the US and spend 3 days getting there and coming back, and then have all the issues with jet lag, and I'd lose my weekend because I would feel rubbish. I'm far better working the way I do. Having said that, the flip side is I've just been through a performance assessment process with all my colleagues around the world, and I've had folks in Argentina logging on at 3 a.m. in the morning, and I can tell you they weren't very happy about it. But how do we get to do a meeting globally with people all around the world that is good for everybody? Now, before we used to fly them all to a central location, and gradually people would acclimatise, and that's not great either, because they've had to leave their families. Some people really don't want to travel. Some people don't even like flying. So I think we've got challenges on all sides of how can we ensure that flexibility. And I think if we can, the longer the short of it is giving people choice and making sure that they're as effective as they can be in a work environment, not an office environment.
Fantastic. And John Hall.
Yeah, well, thanks, Shakib. Been a massive and tragic impact for COVID across the UK, across the world. But we do find ourselves in a once-in-a-century opportunity to bank the digital skills for recent events that forced on us to take those forward for the future. Universities clearly have an enormous role to play in this. Even if the next century, once-in-a-century pandemic, or the next once-in-a-century crisis isn't a century away, educators everywhere have got to learn how to take the skills that we've learned today from this crisis and pass them on to a new generation. The COVID and other things have meant 70 million, in this country at least, have meant 70 million different problems to 70 million different individuals. And the solutions have been reached through learning new skills. We have become more resilient as a nation, I think, because of COVID. We have learned that we have learned what we need to do in certain situations to bounce back from what's being thrown at us, and that is a massive benefit in the new normal, that we are more resilient, and we are at the cusp of a possibility of an opportunity of a digital revolution of a connected nation. If we are to grasp all this, universities have a massive role to play. They've always had a role in teaching the skills, but moreover, they're the one place in society, one place where you can learn to be a better critical thinker, to be a better reflector, to be a better professional updating, and to be better at researching. And all of those critical thinking, working out what's best for you and your organization, reflecting on what you've done and how you can do it better next time, on professional updating, so when the next opportunity comes along, you're ready for it, and to do the research so that you've got the background in where you need to go. So that, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, no. And Lynn, do you have anything to add?
I only say I'd agree, obviously, with what's been said, and I think flexibility, but I think, you know, looking forward, and I think trying to benefit from the past crisis, but also future-proofing us for the next crisis. It's always quite tempting just to build everything around what's just gone, and actually we're not really then planning for the next one. So this has taught us, I suspect, some really great skills about opening our minds. I think in terms of the mix of the ways of working, I'm certainly looking at what actually has to be face-to-face now, and it won't always be that particular skill because it's a practical subject or it's a practical activity. Actually, I think some of the reasons for being face-to-face might be that social aspect. I think it's okay to admit that some of us crave and really do miss the social interaction at work. You know, work is a sociable place, and of course it's stopped being a sociable place. I mean, we did a Desert Island Discs event with my team yesterday. You know, we didn't do the full 8 or 9 or whatever it is on the radio. We did 3. You know, people ranging in age from an apprentice who's 18 through to some of us who are a little bit older. And you know, it's the social interaction, because it's hard to do it online, and we said it would be much more fun if we were all sitting in the park together or the pub or so. But I think actually, so I think it's identifying what has to be done face to face, but also being really transparent and honest about the reasons. So it's not just work driven, it's actually it's the social interaction, and I think we've really got the opportunity to challenge things. I don't think it's going to be a simple answer, but I think we should just go and try things and not be frightened if they don't work. Not, you know, and so we're going through lots of proofs of concept at the university at the moment. You know, I just hope that we're not frightened. We don't feel we have to get them right first time. It's just trying, because you know, every step, if it doesn't work out, we're closer to finding out what will work, aren't we? So that's my kind of view of it. Yeah, I'm quite excited about it, as you can tell.
yeah. No, but that's exactly what happened with pandemic. Nobody had any forethought or way of working. They just played it the best they can and best endeavors, you know, throughout. And people, you know, being informally dressed at any time, meeting, everything became best endeavors. Sorry, John, you got your hand up. You had your hand up.
I've almost learned to turn off the mute button as well, so forgive me for that. But I think Jonathan, I think, was that mentioned agility, and we now have such meeting-rich days with dramatic context changes between meetings. So we prepare differently, and I think that's going to stand us in good stead for the future. I think we can change mindsets much more quickly because the meetings aren't always contiguous or having the same, and that's training our brains to come to understand things differently from the way that we used to. It also means that we're moving and this is a danger. We're moving reflection from the travel time between meetings to dedicated periods in the day. Now that could be a fantastic opportunity for us to reflect more on holistically about what the day has given us, what we've learned from the day, and how we need to prepare for tomorrow. If we do take that opportunity, the alternative is that time just slides because we want to spend few minutes with our family every day, and it would be sad to lose that time between meetings where you do think through what you've done, what you're going to do.
Yeah, I completely agree, because my meetings are now more thought through. Everybody, has to have something to add to the meeting, and if you don't, it's very, very clear very quickly that have you prepared? What's the answer? Now people are preparing. Everything is more condensed. It's more planned. It's very good. I like this way of working. The being there face to face because of the social aspect, and also you can get things done in a different way, especially when you're ideating. But it's all possible. Now, I'm going to twist the question slightly when I talk to Sonia. So Sonia, just simply, what are the three things, just to make it simple, three things that business owners should do around considering, creating a flexible workspace, coming into work, working from home? What are the three things that they should consider about their work so that the well-being aspect is included?
The first thing is for them to actually make employees aware of what their value systems are. Some value systems are particularly drawn to interaction, and if they don't get interaction, you can actually be quite poorly. So the first one is, what are the value systems of the individuals? What are those things that are important to them? The second thing is the belief patterns, any irrational belief patterns. We've all got stuff in our loft mentally. So for example, we might be a little bit anxious. We might be quite needy, wanting to actually have appreciation from another human being. We might be idealist, perfectionist, etc. So to know what sort of things can switch us off, because irrational belief patterns can switch you off, and what are the positive belief patterns for switching you on. And the third thing, which might sound a bit strange, however very effective, is when you've spent time on your own, particularly if you're at home and you go round and round in your head, there's no new information inside your head. So the key is to teach people to see themselves from the outside looking in and saying, if that was my best friend, what are some of the things I'd say to them about what they could do today in order to make it better for them? So for example, not sitting on the chair too long, getting up, having a bit of movement, going and getting some, looking at a view, seeing a bit of greenery can put yourself into a nice alpha state, a more relaxed state. So three things: values, beliefs, what's switching you on and off, and see yourself from the outside so you can manage yourself as your best friend.
Thank you, Sonia. So one of the biggest kind of challenges around the pandemic was about cybersecurity. So Lynn, this is a question focused directly at you. So we know that more people became challenged with cybersecurity and everything else, but you're the UK's foremost remote educational platform. So were you hacked more? Did you have more problems? Where was the security issue? Was it in the employees and their access, or was it the student access?
Oh, so there's a lot of questions, a lot of issues in there. So I think for me, and it was actually I had an opportunity because I had a remit to come in and hopefully move things forward, and so I was already given a bit of a green light. I also think that being plunged into home working pushed us very much into that space. How can we make it work? And then of course I had some might say benefit, if you're a security specialist, of suddenly people were worried about security, because not only were they worried about security of their home life, they were, because it personalized it blended home and work, and I think with security, if you make it personal, people do sit up and listen. But I think also there was a lot of press, but certainly in our sector, where attacks on universities were on the rise. I would say my approach is to be proactive. So what I did, and I'll talk about us more specifically in a second if you like, but I think, regardless of what is going on at that moment. It's understanding the threat environment so that we're not, you know, beating a walnut with a sledgehammer. You know, it's got to be proportionate. So we did we got on the front foot quite early on with some proactive threat hunting. So we brought some very clever people in to do some specialist people to do some digging around the dark web. And actually find out, should we be worried about anything? You know, the good news was that it wasn't too bad, but we did unearth. Sorry, Siri's now stepping in. That's not great. So we, but I think for me it was about that proactive threat hunt. So we learned quite a lot about ourselves. I also think at the same time it was about thinking about what the worst thing is that can happen, because you can't stop everything. So I'm always very realistic about the best option is to be able to respond and recover as well as you can. And so we've invested an awful lot of time, and we're still doing it, in rehearsing how we recover, knowing how we recover, and every little incident, it doesn't matter how small it is, we have a worst case scenario mindset about it. We triage it properly, we try and learn from it. And so setting all of that up, I think it's always a work in progress at any organisation. So, but I do think an organisation will get judged by the recovery. For me, I'm painfully aware of the status and the reputation that the OU has. You know, it is a national treasure. You know, it reaches millions of students, you know, that's stretching back for 50+ years. Everybody's very passionate about it. You know, that's an amazing privilege to be in that position, but it's quite worrying. You know, sometimes I feel like I'm at the edge of a cliff, because that could be dashed if we don't look after and protect properly. So for me, it's how we respond and how we recover. In terms of what we actually saw, we definitely across the sector saw a lot more attacks, and there's been some publicised and some less publicised ransomware attacks on numerous universities, and in particular in the UK. I always think the most difficult thing about cyber attack is you take the Maersk scenario, for example. You know, you don't have to be the target to have catastrophic collateral damage, and that's really what we don't want. So an attack on any university, I kind of always accept as an attack on us as well, or any sector that we touch. So I would say we haven't had anything worse than other organisations, but we've had a lot of worrying things. So we have become more so just to sort of summarise, more proactive. It's about how you bounce back, much like the pandemic. You know, I think as John said, you know, we've become very resilient. So we've invested a lot of time and sometimes money in building our resiliency from a cyber perspective, and constantly being curious about it. So that for me is what we've done. And I'm just going to touch a lot of wood now around here.
John, yes, go on.
Again, coming off mute. Yeah, what Lynn said really resonated. What she said during the presentation resonated again about the better infosec, the focus away from confidentiality. Of course, that's still critical to most organizations, but onto availability and integrity. That learning there is going to make so much a difference for so many organizations. And it also feeds, I think, into a different way of looking at risk for organizations. The board is much more on the ball. They're much more aware of, and because of the information security aspect of this thing, they're much more aware of what risks means. And I think they're dealing with risk in a much more mature way, or the potential is there for them to deal with risk in a much more mature way. And that, again, is going to have real benefits for business. Business continuity management, business continuity planning, scenario planning, those are all really well exercised skills now, and they need to keep going. We need to keep practicing those. Just because the next crisis isn't on us like this one is, the next crisis is just around the corner, and keeping practicing those skills at a board level seriously, not just on the golf course, is going to keep us well and truly at the top of our game.
Yeah, no, that's a good comment. Jonathan, do you have any insights into the cyber challenges at your organisation?
Yeah, obviously. I think there's the threats, like, you know, we described the industrial threat. You know, it's always very prevalent. You know, and that's obviously a big concern when you're dealing with refineries or offshore platforms. or pipelines, as you probably will be very familiar with what's recently happened in the US with the pipeline. So yeah, the way that we monitor that and the way that we look for those threats is key. The other side, though, is at the end of the day, when you've got many thousands of employees, it's the whole spam email and people trying to get hold of your credentials that we spend a lot of time and effort on. So that's our vulnerability, is if people get access to somebody's account or information and then utilizing that to gain further access into the company. So yeah, I think that's an area we continue to spend a lot of emphasis on, and people are getting smarter. I think, as Lynn mentioned, people are bored, maybe a bit bored, I don't know, or can't go to the usual forms of crime, so because everybody's at home, so they can't go burgling, and they come up with new ideas. So so there's some very inventive emails coming out which are there to surprise you. So yeah, staying vigilant as an individual, I think, is important.
Yeah. So a leading on question really is around bring your own device, or we had a challenge with that, but they was bringing it into the corporate network. But then, Jonathan, what about those employees at home using their equipment? Do you have a policy of buying equipment and making sure it's secure for your company, or do they use their own? And then how do you verify that security model? Because they, in a personal life, will be searching anything, doing anything, versus the corporate piece.
That's right. Yeah, we have a pretty strict policy with regards to the company connected equipment. So it's provided by the company. You can't use personal email services; they're all blocked. So things like your Gmails, your Yahoos, etc. You can't access any bank information from your company PC or laptop, or even your mobile device. We do have a BYOD mobile unit, and that uses basically a secure mechanism to gain access into the environment. But that's fairly limited use, and again, mainly people in the US who've got a lot of their own devices. But we're very much segregate the home environment from the company environment.
Yeah. And Lynn, how do you do yours?
Yeah, it's quite a hot topic for us actually at the moment, because because we've got probably not quite 50-50 split, but if we look at sort of our teaching community, it is a BYOD setup really, and there's also a lot of other members of staff, but we also provide the majority of our what I call sort of support staff and the kind of engine room of our academic staff, if you like, with managed devices. So I'm actually challenging this at the moment, because I don't want to make any assumptions that it's one or the other, because again, I think that we can be clever, and it's about the effect that we want to have and making sure that that's proportionate. So what is the threat? And it's the case of, what do we need to have access to in order to do our job, whether I am working in security or whether I'm a lecturer in English, whatever it happens to be, I need to understand how I do my business. And I think the pandemic in a way has put us on that front foot, because we all had to go home, and so this is the condition, Lynn, you need to make sure we can do it safely, as opposed to, can I go home? And me going, well, actually, no, it's not the safest thing for you to do. So we should maintain that, and it should be, how do you want to work? What data, what information do you need to work? How can I make it secure? And I think nowadays, yes, I would have a lot more control if everybody had the exact same managed device. But I've also got to acknowledge that managed device won't be the best device for some people to do their job. And I just think it would be a backward step for me, because we're not as regulated as the energy sector. We're not the same as banks. And we've actually got to put it in the context of a university. So, endpoint protection is really what I'm talking about here. And it's just making sure that I have got the right controls. So we are doing a lot of work around this at the moment, because I think there've been too many assumptions. And if the pandemic has taught me anything, I want to challenge those assumptions, and I want to do some really good analysis over how people want to work, how people need to work, and then find a way of doing it securely. And that might lead us down the path of a real composite model. So and I know, to be honest, it's a hot topic at the university right now, which is why I want to get the data around this first.
No, I fully appreciate that. We're having the same discussions with my clients, and we're talking about virtual environments now, because by having a virtual desktop, you've got point-to-point encryption, you've got the estate running at the same level, there's no two kits, you know, this is all the same kit. You can add more resources if you've got somebody that needs more intense resources, but then the device just becomes a gateway device. You don't care what's on the endpoint, so the pressure is off, and you can't get nefarious payloads injecting themselves into this communication piece. But it's a very simplifying process, but it costs more money.
Yeah. It's I think it's one step at a time. I think, you know, and I think some things we will be able to do. I mean, the government's bringing in, you know, new regulation or new legislation around mobile phones and placing the responsibility with the manufacturers. And so, you know, it pretty much is a no-brainer to make sure that we've got the right technical controls if people are accessing their inbox from their mobile device. You know, we do now need to, you know, action some of those controls. And I think that will become the sort of the benchmark for every organisation, because it's not at the moment. And so I think there will be some things that regulation might help us with. But other than that, I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's exciting. I think it's an exciting time to really look at how people are going to access and how they want to work. As I said, I think we've got to say, what do you want to do? What do you need to do? Let me find a way to make it possible. There'll inevitably be a compromise, but I think that's how I want to approach it.
Yeah, I think the whole world's re-looking at cybersecurity. You know, how do we approach it as a company, as a nation, and as a world? Yeah, the big players like Russia and China are doing their thing, you know, and we've got to respond accordingly. And John has a comment.
Strange, eh? I've even moved off mute very early. I think this brings up another really interesting point, which is the ability of organizations to move away from purely technical solutions for their problems to socio-technical solutions for their problems. We're all at the end now of technology, which has always been the case, email, blah, blah, blah. But now we need to think about the empathetic, the sympathetic parts of the technology so that it enables people to do their job. Not only are we designing systems, not only are we designing technology to allow people to do their job, we're designing new ways of working. And I know Lynn's been heavily involved in this at the Open University. And Sonia, your expertise is in getting people to the point where they can contribute best, I think. And that social aspect of things, that social aspect of the socio-technical systems is going to become even more incredibly important as we move through this. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good comment, because like Jonathan was saying, it's around that social engineering piece about trying to capture people's details. And this is something that you can't really guard against, but you have to educate against. So there's a mindset piece, like you mentioned, and Sonia's in that space. The mindset piece being saying, why is this person sending me this email? Is it a genuine email? You know, why am I in for $100 million? You know, and don't let greed get the best of me, and do not click that link. And so the whole social engineering is one of our biggest dangers. And whilst you can monitor behavior and everything else, but if it's a well-worded email, you know, saying that, you know, incorporates your password is expiring in 2 days, please reset it, you know, and it's in the corporate colors and looks like a corporate domain, people will click. You know, but what can you do apart from, you know, put some procedures in place to protect yourself? You know, and that's a notorious way of getting ransomware into the systems. Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about cybersecurity. The other thing is around people coming back to work and their employment. So what are the new jobs being created by the pandemic and you know, going back to the workspace? What are the new areas of skills required, or you know, opportunities? How do we actually, you know, ready the new workforce for the new kind of roles that would come into this area? I'm going to start with Sonia, see if she's got any insights around the kind of new roles. You know, and if well-being is one of the new roles that's growing, and especially working with employees in remote locations or in challenging times, to have some kind of a therapeutic or remedial piece. So what kind of jobs do you think I've got to start?
Well, first of all, what's emerged is that there are a lot more mental first aiders. that will contact you at home. Previously, you know, they might have had a handful. Now there are more of those mental first aiders so that they can talk to you about what's happening for you. So if I just pick up the point about receiving an email and you don't know whether it's bogus, in the office you have people around you, so you can turn to your colleague and say, what do you think of this? And do something. It feels very, very lonely for people when they're at home, they're working alone, and they're wondering about what to do about that sort of thing. Also, because of the increase in emails rather than dialogue, there's this sense of, well, I've got this email and this person's getting really bolshy with me. What do I do about it? I'm here on my own. And one of the worst crimes is when people have a Teams meeting and there's no videos on. And there is a perception that if the video isn't on, then they're probably not that interested in what you have to say, and they're doing something else, maybe even thinking about what they're going to have for tea and looking up a recipe. So there's this psychological effect of being in a very new world where you don't have the support mechanisms that you had before. Now, what employers have started to do is they've started to also screen people who they think actually it's more economic for them to work at home. Have they got the emotional resilience to be able to handle that? So, for example, one of the things we do is we screen for things like anxiousness and also idealism and perfectionism. If you've got some of those things going on, then working from home alone isn't great. You might have all the technical skills in the world. However, if you're going to kick off because you've got some behaviour stuff going on, then it's not good. Whereas previously in the office, it could be handled because there were other people around you and you could bounce things off them. Well, now it's much cheaper for some employers to actually have you working from home. So now they've got to be a bit careful about who they have doing that. And also those that are actually going into the office have, particularly leaders, have more of a role around checking out with employees. Are you okay? You know, you've got this new way of working. Do you need anything? Something going on. So, for example, I had a lady the other day. I work a lot with NHS consultants who are incredibly pressured right now. And one of the consultants said, you know what? I come home from work and I'm doing far more online. And all I need, Sonia, is my colleagues there to give me a hug because the pressure's killing me. And she's one of those people that it's just not good asking her to work from home. She needs that interaction at work for somebody to say, it's okay. I know the pressure's impossible at the moment with, you know, all that's going on, but here we'll give you a hug. Now giving hugs is a bit of a no-no. 40% of the population really need to connect. They need that stroking. And it needs to be physical, so a hug is important. So yeah, very, very challenging times for employers because they've got a new criteria for, do we put this person into this role? Have they got the emotional resilience to do it?
Oh, that's good. So Jonathan, can I ask you a question? What kind of jobs do you think are being created? And part two to that question, have you got a mental health aider in the organisation?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So obviously, I think, you know, we've heard a lot externally, you know, about the shortage of jobs, certainly technical jobs within all industries. Really, it's amazing to see. You know, I think there was this fear that as we came out of COVID, there'll be this mass redundancy, and you know, people who can't get a role, and with finding some of the technical positions, it's difficult to find people. What I'm sort of seeing is, and I think it just plays out by where we are in life, is a lot of people are choosing different career options. You know, people that have perhaps spent 20, 30 years in a company have said, actually, I quite like, you know, this more sort of dynamic working life. I don't want to be going, certainly want to go back to where I was before. And even to the point where they said, actually, I don't want to work 5 days a week. Why should I work 5 days a week? You know, I want to change the way that I behave. The impact that's having is we're losing significant experience, you know, because again, I think this is because companies need to embrace a new way of working. They're saying, well, how do I hire somebody who just wants to work a certain amount of hours? You know, that my policy doesn't cope for that. You know, how do I manage their pensions? How do I manage their benefits? You know, I need people to work a normal working week, and we've got to change. That's got to change, because we'll lose all of this knowledge otherwise, because those people will choose to say, actually, I don't want that 9 to 5 job anymore, or that 80-hour working week. You know, I want more flexibility. So and then the demand on the younger people in the organisation is they've all got the technical skills. The technical skills you can learn quite rapidly. We've talked about e-learning. There's great tools and processes there to develop the skills in the solutions that we need. But things like collaboration, having empathy for other people, a bit like Sonia was saying, being able to connect with people and say, oh, you don't sound very good on the phone, are you okay? Because if you're not interacting with them personally, you sometimes can't pick that up. And I think a lot of, you know, it's getting those skills in people, and that's what we really need, is people who have got that ability to build networks, to recognise people when they're in difficult positions. And yeah, I'd like to get that into a lot of the training that we're giving people. In terms of myself, you know, do I have somebody who looks after me? It's a good question. I've only recently we've had this thing at work saying, "Are you okay?" And just sending a message to somebody saying, "Are you okay?" And we suddenly realised that people just respond, "Yes, I am." Now we say, "Are you okay?" twice, and actually saying it twice, somebody says, "Oh, you really want to ask? You are really asking me." And it's amazing how many conversations you then have. Like somebody asked me, and I had a really bad day one day, and yeah, the first one, I am fine. And he said, no, actually, I'm not. And then he set up a meeting with me straight away. He said, let's talk for 30 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful.
And so I think, I don't have a specific one, but I think people are beginning to learn that actually we are trying to look out for each other, which is great. You know, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, fantastic. And Lynn, same question to you, is what kind of new emerging jobs are you seeing that the pandemic has created? And also, do you have mental health aiders in the organisation?
I think I'd like to think there will be roles such as, you know, senior roles, which are the director of remote working. Yeah, rather than just it's something how the workforce evolves. Actually, somebody who really looks at is responsible for the strategy around that. And I suppose underneath that, they probably would play a very strong kind of well-being role, but that's probably then needs to link in with everybody else. So I think there will be some new roles that come out of it. I mean, I think there'll be there's got to be some of the industries that weren't as busy, you know, office outfitters, you know, for example, you know, probably flipped to home office redesign, for example, and you know, setting up an office in your garden, you know, those are kind of those have merged. I suspect some of the catering, you know, there's a slight shift. There's much more online business now, I would suggest, because if you went into London during the pandemic at all, obviously you walk through the city, it's just a ghost town, everything is absolutely shut. I would imagine, because of the way people are working, that especially as we open up again and we get more freedom, that things like gyms and stuff will be much more mobile. What might have been the you know, daytime classes attended by people who aren't working, actually people who are working and have got much more agile working patterns can probably attend things at different times. It's not all squeezing it in after 6 o'clock in the evening. In terms of the well-being, what I've noticed, so we do have, certainly across the university, that we have lots of I lead our inclusivity and our engagement and wellbeing work streams within the area that I work, and we're very much taking the view that this isn't just to get us through the pandemic. This is what we should just be doing. So this will continue. So we are at the university exploring lots of some really good initiatives at the moment around mental health champions, but not just having it as a focal point, but I think as Jonathan said, somebody that you can go to when you've had a really bad day. And I've seen it work really well in some organisations, especially when it's a person who is not in your direct sort of area of responsibility, someone who you just want to go to as a sounding board, or you respect them, or you can, and so having some of those mental health and welfare and well-being champions who are very open about their own experiences more often than not, and people can relate to, is a route that we're definitely going down. And I think initially there was a thought that it was just to get us through the pandemic because it was affecting people's mental health. Actually, it's a case of we should just be doing this. This is here to stay. So I think that's a real positive.
No, that is, again, because before you had the hidden workforce who had challenges and nobody was helping them with. Now it becomes quite transparent, and the company should be providing some kind of help. So John Hall, so is the same kind of comment to you, but really, what are these emerging jobs that you see with your clients and with organizations around new jobs post-pandemic that the pandemic has inspired or created?
Well, clearly there's all the usual roles, with either adding virtual on the front, adding digital on the front, adding empathetic on the front, picking up what Sonia was saying, adding authentic, picking up what Jonathan was saying. So all those roles. But I think we've seen a rise in the ability of people to homeschool. There's a nice skill for people to have. Listeners, I think this sort of focuses on Jonathan, Sonia, and Lynn's points about somebody inside the organisation, but somebody inside your life that's a listener for you, somebody who's not a professional listener, but who cares about you and who has your well-being at heart, whether that's as part of the workspace or whether it's at home. But I also see more, who doesn't listen to podcasts these days? Everybody has become a podcaster. It's a new profession. You can make real money from it, and it's a really fantastic thing. That's really changing the world. But I also see more worrying things around the areas of non-human roles, agencies through artificial intelligence and machine learning. It doesn't have to be negative, but they are sitting in, and there are very positive roles they can play, and I'll come on to that in a moment, but they're sitting between people and mediating conversations. They're mediating information transfer and picking up a lot of personal information from that. And I think that's Facebook, Twitter, whoever you are, they're picking up a lot of information about people, putting that together in not necessarily positive ways to understand people's motivations and their needs and their drivers. And that I think is something on the negative side. But then again, we also need we also need those people or those systems that are going to put people with needs in touch with people with solutions, without that negative agenda in the middle of just making money. And this comes back to the socio-technical systems. We're not talking about linking people through technology to make money out of them. We're talking about linking people through technology to create better cultures, to create better social environments, and to create a better world. And the people that do that, the online influencers, the on-demand gurus, the people on YouTube that are teaching us to live in different ways, I think that's an incredible positive that we just haven't had the motivation to explore in the way we have before. There are 23,000 YouTubers with more than 1 million followers. They're each making a lot of money for doing a good job, whether it's plumbing in a washer or working out how to get to Mars. They're doing a really good job.
Yeah. So that's a job for the future, yeah. Mars space attendant.
That's right, yes.
Fantastic. So one of the things that we're looking at the pandemic, is opening up the economy. But we've just had yesterday, Boris has announced that we've got a 4-week delay around totally opening up with the other variants. So Delta variant is being I think 60% more active than the others. So whilst we're all preparing to open up and everything else, just to go through the group again and talk about any concerns if we held up again, if there's another variant. What are your concerns about the economy and the people around you? I'm going to start that with John Hall while we're talking. So just to say,
well, I'm pretty upbeat about this. I mean, we've dealt with one. I mean, the immediate problems aren't going away anytime soon. It's good to see that government are taking a risk-managed attitude towards the issues that are arising. But I'm pretty upbeat about our ability to think rationally about the future crises that we'll actually hit. We've done quite well as a society. We've done quite well in getting to a point where people are looking positive again, and we are on the up, and we have to keep that going, and I think we can. Organizations have changed, people have changed, but they've changed in good ways.
Great stuff. Lynn?
Yeah, I'm with John on this. I think the downside is I guess, you know, the time of year that's happening. I think people's holidays, you know, I can see, you know, that sort of perspective. However, you know, it's a case of we're nearly there, just hang on in there. And I think the risk-based approach, I can't help but think about this as almost the same as a massive cyber attack. If there was data, if the data showed, I sound like the government talking about data, but if the data was showing that things were not improving either enough or improving, and indeed getting slightly worse, we can't release our controls. Yeah, we just wouldn't, because the cyber attacker would just come back. And I think this is exactly the same. It's that kind of, you know, if this were more physical and you were, you know, going to be able to see what that risk was, and you wouldn't venture out onto the streets until you were absolutely sure. And so I think that it's sensible, and I think it was explained, you know, reasonably well yesterday, if I'm honest. Yeah. But I the worry in terms of the economy, I suppose it's easy for me to say because I'm not, you know, working in the travel sector. I'm not I'm not in the retail industry, or I'm not in hospitality. But those I think have already been affected pretty badly, if that's where they're going to be affected. And we're hopefully only talking about, you know, 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. I you know, genuinely don't know. But I think at the end of the day, we don't want more people to be affected by this. So I think we just got to hang on in there, and you know, unfortunately, what will be will be.
Yeah. No, good stuff. And Jonathan.
Yeah, I think for me it's clarity of message. You know, we say that in a lot of things. It's, you know, people just got to be absolutely clear what's expected of people. Otherwise, people will start to disconnect and do their own things. So I think that's one important aspect. I think the other side as well is you can't keep changing your mind, because, you know, we talk about industries like the travel, or, you know, there's the person with the coffee shop. You know, at the end of the day, they spend 2 weeks preparing for a date, and then 1 week before that date, it gets changed. All right, and that is not acceptable for some people. You know, they spent all that time and money getting ready, and then all of a sudden they got to shut the door again. So I think, yeah, if we've got to somehow identify what's the future gonna look like, and if it is, you know, it's constant on off, then we've got to accept that, and people got to say, well, how do I prepare and work around that? So again, I think we've all said it's all that risk assessment, and how am I going to run my business knowing that it's going to be in this sort of volatile sort of situation for 6, 12 months, whatever.
Yeah. And over to you, Sonia.
Well, I've seen a real surge in the number of people who are running businesses who are just not coping because they're so uncertain about the future. And in a way, that's generated more jobs, because it's needed more people who can pick people up and put them back together again. Having said that, I agree with Jonathan about the fact that we can't keep stopping and starting, because people just don't know where they are. That is incredibly damaging when they put so much effort in. And I think the best way of handling it psychologically is to say, right, this is the way it's going to be now. We have to understand the world's dangerous. You know, there's a disease out there, and we have to adapt and start living with it, rather than thinking, when are we going to get back to the normal? I don't think there's any such thing. I think it's different, and we have to all start accepting that it is different. I mean, I know when the flu jab came out and we're all worried about getting flu, we just accept that, don't we? I know this is far more serious, and we just accept that, you know, if you want to be protected from flu, you get a jab. Doesn't mean you won't have to go back and have another one, though. And I think once we've all accepted that, we'll be in a much better place, because that's one of the things I have to do with clients who feel they're crumbling because they don't know where the hell they are with their business. So look, just accept this is how it is for the rest of your days. How are you going to adapt? How are you going to reinvent yourself? Instead of holding on to what might be, could be, maybe, what about you taking control and saying, you know what am I going to do instead? Instead of blaming the government, blaming the world, you know, blaming India, blaming everybody, actually take back control and say, what are you going to do to actually start doing something that you know is a little bit more reliable than what you're doing? I think we're going to take back control.
Okay.
That's key.
Yeah, no, thank you. And John Hall, so we've covered a lot of areas around this, the future norm. So what are the kind of questions that you'd like to ask the panel?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So what the sort of questions I'd like to ask the panel are, will we ever get back to where we were? I think I know the answer to that. What would and going back to one of my previous points, what are the systems, what are the organizations going to look like? Are they going to be more personal? Are they going to be more involving of people? Are they going to be more based on technology? I want to know how organizations are going to change, what sort of problems they're going to face in the future, and how we're going to solve those.
So that goes to Lynn.
That's evil.
You're on mute.
Sorry. I think it would be quite easy for them to go down the technology route and become very impersonal, and I suspect there will be some that do that. And maybe there will be some where the personal interaction isn't needed. I would hope, though, that there will be a different type of personal interaction that is totally enabled by technology, where people just know how to use it really well, but also know when they've got to get together and they've actually got to sort of, you know, have those conversations. Because one of the things that worries me is I think we might have to go through, I think I talked about it earlier, is this, we're almost too formal sometimes in our working day, and hiding behind an email is a lot easier than having a very difficult conversation, and it's easier to avoid conflict, and sometimes conflict breeds fantastic ideas, because it's like, if it's done well, you know, it's like, let's just have a proper brainstorming session, let's work out what we both want, and so I worry that we might avoid that, but I hope that we will get a people-focused organisation where organisations listen to their people to find out how they want to work, and actually then provide the technology that supports that. So but because I think there's that the different skills that we have to develop will be slight adjustment to the way that we communicate, because it's, you know, it's often we're taught about communicating in person, aren't we? We know how to put a good presentation together and interact with the audience, but of course it's very different doing it in this sort of way, or even on the run on your mobile phone when you haven't got video. And we've got to find ways of injecting that warmth into all of that in a different way. So I hope we will get to that stage, and I think a lot of organisations will, but I worry, if this isn't too doom and gloom, that we'll go through that impersonal sort of stage first, because it's in a way it's easier, isn't it? It's much easier, and we'll stop talking to each other properly.
Yeah, Jonathan.
Yeah, so I think as John knows, I don't think we're not going to go back to where we were, and I think the mantra that a lot of people are using is we've got to get better rather than worse. So absolutely look at ways of how we can use what we've learned during this period to accelerate some of the things that we were thinking about. The one that on a personal front that always springs to mind is the whole medical situation, isn't it? Where the ability you can connect with your doctor on the phone over through video conferencing. That capability existed before COVID. It's just they didn't want to. A lot of places didn't want to roll it out or felt people weren't going to use it. And I never went, and it was very difficult to see a doctor. So now you can see them anytime you want. Ironically, I do know some doctors that they've got people going to them now with just because they want to have a chat. And that's a completely different challenge. So you know, but on the tech side, I think for me, you know, a massive area I was involved in was sensors. And again, going back to sort of the medical and human side, what we're really looking at is how can we connect sensors on people to get more information about them when they're out in the field, you know, so we don't have to have people traveling out there to attach a little device to identify if they're getting exposure to a substance. We've got a device out there that's constantly monitoring them. So not only will that person be in a better, safer place, we'll actually have more data that we can analyze centrally. And we'll have, you know, data scientists and interpreters that can really use that data, both scientifically, but also from an engineering perspective. So I think, yeah, things to me like the machine learning and the sensors and the AI are going to be key, and enable people to then back in remote locations from those people to analyse that data and make some really good decisions for the people that have to be at the coalface of these activities.
Fantastic. And Sonia?
Well, as I said before, we have to just get used to this is the way it is and to manage it. I think it's really important to be aware of this silent contaminator that can be the psychological effects of this. Really key that leaders are skilled to recognise the physiological signals that tell you something's not working. So shift in breathing, noticing blood pressure going up, tightness in the jaw, some of the key signals to say something's not quite right. To actually insist that if you are having a Teams meeting, everybody is seen, because you've more chance of actually seeing if something's not quite right. And also to make sure that people have an ability to do a self-inventory. You know, am I really okay? And where do I go if I'm not okay? And to actually build that in the same way that you would build in if you cut your finger, there's a procedure in place to actually go and get it fixed. You need a mental health procedure in place, because if you don't, it's very expensive for businesses if they don't have that in place, because my experience is that people can end up off sick. And sometimes they wait until they've fallen off the cliff mentally, and then they'll ring us and say, oh, we need to sort Ted out, he won't leave the house. You know, there needs to be that basic skill in place to notice what's happening before it happens, because they can be off 6 weeks or more. Wouldn't it be more sensible to just have the ability to notice what's going on?
Yeah, no, completely agree. So we're coming towards the end of our event, and I'm just going to ask the last question. I'm going to start off with Sonia. As a takeaway, what should the attendees, what would you like to give to them as a takeaway?
I said earlier in the session, when you're inside your head looking out at the world, your brain can actually tell you unhelpful things. Whereas when you step outside yourself and see yourself from the outside, it'll bypass the emotional part of the brain, the limbic system, and it'll actually give you a more logical frontal lobe answer as to what's going on, and you can manage yourself. So that's my gift. Get out more mentally, see yourself from the outside, and then you can manage what's going on to maintain a positive attitude that'll take you where you want to go, rather than letting something else control you.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Jonathan?
Yeah, for me, it's very simple. Identify what's important to you. Make your own life choices, and actually you'll be surprised actually that the work that you do will be aligned with what you actually make as a choice. So that's my simple message.
Thank you. Lynn?
So my thoughts are, remember what worked well, especially what surprised you, and what else could be challenged, because we're probably not going to go back to life as it was. And I suppose first and foremost is try new things. Yeah, everything should be challenged, but don't worry if trying new things doesn't work, because it's just going to get us to something new. I would say overall my takeaway that for people is try to be excited about this, because we are where we are.
Yeah, no, thank you. John?
I've immensely enjoyed listening to Jonathan, Sonia, and Lynn, and I'll take away a lot from what they've said. I would encourage people to do what you do, to do it as well as you can, but to do it virtually, digitally, empathetically, and authentically. And if there is some change you can make in somebody else's life, if there's some difference you can make to somebody else's life with just a little spark of happiness or of inquiry or of empathy, then do it, and do it as often as it needs to be done.
No, wonderful. Yeah, no, I completely agree with helping others actually helps you. So during the pandemic, we helped raise 60 Raspberry Pis for kids in the Northeast who are aged 7 to 9. So they got a great video sent to me thanking me and the team. So, you know, and that's why I do my day job now, is running a charity around digital skills. So it's very, 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 to me, very important that we pay it forward. And I've seen the world change. You know, I've been in business for so long, but pre-pandemic, very transactional. And the first quarter of the COVID was very confused. But now it's quite settled. People are in their stride. They do their virtual meetings, they have their personal lives, and they move forward. There are cracks in it, and I know that this is going to go forward. I'd like to say thank you very much to Jack Fowler and Jane Dickinson from the Open University that helped us organize this. Like anybody else who's been involved, I can't remember everybody, but it was thoroughly enjoying having you speak and listening to what you said. And to all the attendees, thank you for attending. I hope you enjoyed it. And until the next time, thank you very much. Good night.